Now that we have checked for fret buzz, found our 3rd fret notes are all pretty buzzy, and our 16th fret. So now that I've notated the areas where the guitar is buzzy, I'm going to use my fret rocker to determine what is actually happening at the frets. So the MusicNomad fret rocker, I really like the design of this. It's really easy to use. It has a rectangular shape, so it stays low to the fret, and the weight stays centered between your fingers. It doesn't ever feel tippy. It also has the added bonus of being an string action gauge. So you've got your string action gauge in inches and millimeters on both sides. We've got an action chart on here as well. And it just has a nice weight to it. So, I use this as my main action gauge as well as my fret rocker. So, really cool tool. So now with my fret rocker down at the 3rd fret, I know that my note is buzzing at the 3rd, which means my 4th fret is probably high. So now I'll check with the fret rocker to see if my 4th fret is high. I suspect it will be from the A string to the E just based on my buzz values, but we'll see. So here I go. I'm spanning 3 frets with the sort of medium edge of the fret rocker. And at the low E, I'm not getting, just the barest amount of rock, almost nothing. So I move over to the A. It's definitely getting a little more. D's got a fairly pronounced rock. B and E are all rocking. So now I know it's high, but let's have a look and see with my fret gauge, is it actually out of spec? So to determine that, I'm going to use my fret level gauge to see how big the gap is between the rocker and the fret top. So I'll put the gauge back on my 4th fret, and I'm going to rock it back to the 3rd fret and see if my gauge fits between the fret rocker and the 5th fret, and it does. So I'm definitely out of spec on my fret height. I'll check it again at the G string. It definitely goes between the 5th fret and the rocker. Now I'll come in from this side, check same thing. Yep, it goes through. Not quite as easily, but it definitely goes through. And then same thing on my high E. It definitely goes through. Not quite as easily, but it definitely makes it. My 4th fret is out of spec. It's too high. So now I'll check the seating to make sure that the fret is seated. And that's done by using my fret seating gauge. I'll take that and I'll just put it up against the fret crown and see if it slides underneath the fret crown between the crown and the fingerboard. Now it doesn't, so that shows me that the fret is actually seated to the fretboard. It's just high, whether it's the wood, is a little bit, was not leveled exactly there when it was fretted, or something has swelled over time. But the fret is seated properly. It's just the fret is too high. So what you might find is that the fret seating gauge does slide under the fret crown. And so then you know that the fret crown is not seated totally to the fingerboard. Now, if that's the case, you're going to want to check to see if the fret is solidly in the fingerboard by using your fret rocker and tapping on the fret. Now, I can hear that this fret is solidly seated in the fretboard. If you have a fret where the crown is not seated, it might still be solidly in the fingerboard. Maybe it was not pressed fully and it was glued, so it's rigid, but it's still just a little bit high. Or you might find that when you tap the fret top, it sounds very hollow because the fret is loose and it's sprung up in the middle. Now, if the fret is loose and has sprung up, the best bet is to take your guitar to a competent shop and have your frets assessed because they may need to be pressed and glued. So now that we've verified that our 4th fret is high, I'm going to move up to my 16th fret that was quite buzzy on the high E, and I'm going to do the same thing. I'm going to use my fret rocker to check. I'm going to span 3 frets. And yes, it is quite high at the E string. It's a little bit high at the B, even though it wasn't buzzing. And it's not high at all at the G. So I'm going to take my my fret level gauge. I'm going to again put my rocker on at the 17th fret, because again, if it buzzes at the 16th fret note, it's probably the 17th fret that's high. So now I'll check at the 18th, and my gauge easily goes through. Same thing at the B string. Now the G, it does not go through. So my 18th fret at the G is properly leveled, but it's rising up at the B and the E string. So now I'm going to want to check the end to see if it's seated, because maybe that end has just popped up and it needs to be pressed. But I'm not getting any my gauge does not go under at all. So my fret is properly seated, and just to double check everything, tapping that, and it's really solidly mounted, so I know that I can safely level that fret without it springing up and down. So the last step in my fret assessment is just to make sure that my frets are high enough to level. So in order to do that, I will use my fret height gauge in the fret gauge kit. To use that gauge, I'm going to put my fret rocker across the frets and put my gauge between the fretboard and the fret rocker, because I want to measure the distance between the fingerboard and the fret rocker, which is the same as the height of the fret. So this is a 24 thousandths inch thick gauge, which is definitely the lowest that you want to level your frets. And this goes through and has plenty of room. This has got, I mean, these are probably over 40 thousandths of an inch high in that area. And since I'm going to level up here, I will go ahead and do the same. Put that across, and I have got plenty of room. So I've got more than enough fret to level those two frets.
For more videos on how to perform guitar setups or care for your frets, subscribe to our channel and visit musicnomadcare.com for all our products and how-to videos.